Welcome to tonight's live stream. I am going to get started in a moment. I just need to let everybody on social media know that the stream is currently on the air. Good evening, Yak Diesel. Glad to see you here. We'll get ready to get into tonight's show. But before I get into the show, I want everybody to know that if you want to donate, it's best to donate to the Cash App because with the Cash App, I get 100% of the money that you donate. Because if you give out super chats, what happens is that YouTube takes 30% of that money, and that means that less money comes to me. So if you guys want to donate, you guys can donate to the Cash App by clicking the link in the description box. Or if you want to use PayPal, you can donate to the PayPal as well. These ways, I get 100% of the funds, and none of it really goes to YouTube and allows them to get a 30% cut of whatever money you donate. So 100% of the money comes through the PayPal or the Cash App, and I wanted everybody to know that. Glad to see you here, Keating Work. Glad to see you here, Mobile Maze. I'm glad to see you all here. And before I get into tonight's topic, I wanted everybody to go out here and head over to lulu.com and pick up a copy of John Haynes at Death Store on Lulu. This was the comic that was a part of the successful 2022 Kickstarter. And I want everybody who didn't get a copy back then to be able to get their own copy this time. So if you guys want to go out here and get the first full John Haynes comic, you can get the first full John Haynes comic on lulu.com right now by clicking the link in the chat. So that's also how you can help the channel and help get a great action-packed comic featuring the man who rules the world. And you can also pick up the 2023 books in the SJS Direct imprint, John Haynes Godbreaker and John Haynes 1987. You can find both of these books on Amazon.com right now in paperback and Kindle format. And I wanted to give everybody a quick update before I go on to talk about tonight's topic. And I wanted to give everybody an update on the 2024 SJS Direct books. The 2024 SJS Direct books are all but complete. I mean, all the books have been written out right now and edited. I have Isis Dark Incubus. I have Steam, Horror in the Hamptons, and I have John Haynes Illuminati. And I just got in touch with Mike Williams and talked to him about doing the cover for John Haynes Illuminati. And if you looked at the post, you saw the concept for the cover. And I'm following YouTuber Chris Crazy House's advice. He wanted me to do a homage to 1988's Action Jackson's movie poster for the cover. And that's what the cover is going to be. Now, I've done homages to other movies. I did a homage to A Low Down Dirty Shame for John Haynes Taking Care of Business. And I'm doing the Action Jackson one for Illuminati, and I hope you guys will be there in 2024. I'm glad you enjoyed Godbreaker on Yacht Diesel. That was one that really meant a lot to me to put together, and it was John Haynes versus Thor. So if you guys haven't picked up Godbreaker, you gotta pick up John Haynes Godbreaker. Now, with all that perfunctory said, I'm gonna get into tonight's topic, and tonight's topic is one where I'm gonna talk about why the streaming bubble popped for Hollywood. Now, streaming was speculated to be the next big thing by Hollywood executives, and a lot of these Hollywood executives basically speculating on the success of Netflix. Now, Netflix went from creating this mail order service for DVDs where people would go out here and pick the DVDs they want on the internet and have them shipped to them as part of a subscription. But over the mid to late 2000s, 2010s, Netflix went from a DVD service to a streaming service. And streaming has been around for some time. I mean, I remember in 2008, 2009, Crackle came around, but Crackle never really caught on until Netflix started to show that this could be a viable way for studios to go out here and make money. Now, a lot of these studio executives saw Netflix making all of this money as related to the subscriptions they were getting for their service. And they thought that Netflix had this whole model in the bag. They thought that they could go out here and make their own model to have the same success as Netflix because as content creators, they thought that they could go out here and make better content than what was being presented on Netflix. Now, the big mistake that these studios made were two things. One, these studios really didn't have executives with the vision to go out here and manage a streaming service. And two, many of these streaming models really didn't, these people who were running these studios really didn't understand the business model of Netflix and what made it profitable. Now, what made Netflix profitable as a streaming service really was two things. One, they were out here going out here and paying the studios for their content. And as they were paying the studios for their content, they were going out here and reaping a lot of profits because at the time they were the most popular streaming service that had all of the content. And on the internet, content is king. And if you have a place where all the content is, then people are going to give your website foot traffic for your whole platform to grow because that was the main thing that made Netflix grow was the fact that they were the place where you could get to see lots of content from all of the movie studios in one place. And you could also get to see fresh original content that was made exclusively for the platform. That is what made Netflix a popular destination for people as related to streaming. They could go out here and watch many of these old TV shows and movies like they used to in syndication. And they could also go out here and watch original television series like the new Marvel adaptations they made at the time, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Daredevil, and The Punisher, and Iron Fist. And because this was the platform they could go to see this exclusive content, this is what made Netflix a popular destination because it was a place where people could choose to watch whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, and the price was extremely reasonable and affordable for most people. I mean, Netflix was basically $8 a month, so people had no problem looking to spend that kind of money to get unlimited access to unlimited content. So these are the two things that led to Netflix becoming a popular destination. However, many of the studios didn't really like going out here and seeing Netflix make all of this money. And because the studios didn't like seeing Netflix make all of this money, they thought that they were losing out on the opportunity to capitalize on what they thought the streaming marketplace was. Now, anybody who knows television and entertainment, like I do after studying it for over 25 years, knew that streaming was not going to be the next big thing. But many of the Hollywood's studio executives, they wanted to believe that it was going to be the next big thing because of Netflix's profits. But what they really weren't looking at was the business model for Netflix. The reason why was making billions of dollars in profits wasn't just because of the subscriptions. No, the main reason why Netflix was making billions of dollars was because the big six media platforms were basically paying Netflix billions of dollars for their content. And because the big six were actually paying Netflix, This is what added to their bottom line. The subscribers basically were not really adding to the bottom line. What was really adding to their bottom line was all of the people in these studios who were financing them by giving them content. I mean, you had Disney paying Netflix to put their movies on their platform. You had Warner Brothers paying to put movies on their platforms. You had Sony putting movies on their platforms. You had Comcast putting movies on their platforms. You had News Corp, Fox putting that on their platforms. And all these companies were basically paying Netflix for the ability to stream on the platform. And in addition to paying for old content, they were also financing brand new content. So Netflix was just basically being paid similar to the way syndicators used to pay for their content. And the syndicator would again sell the content to the TV channels, and those TV channels would basically air this content in exchange for ad dollars that they could make money on that content. But the people who were running Hollywood really didn't take that critical look at the business model for streaming, and they speculated that the streaming market was going to grow because they saw so many people going out here and getting subscriptions for Netflix. They speculated that there would be all of these people going out here looking to go out here and put money for subs. And they went out here believing that there was so much money out here for subs. So they believed that, oh, we can go out here and make more money if we create our own streaming services. And that's where we got the big six media companies looking to go out here and make their own platforms. We had Viacom, or what they call Paramount Global, looking to make their Paramount Plus platform. We had Disney looking to make their Disney Plus platform. We had other companies looking to make their own platforms, like with I believe Comcast made the Peacock platform, and we had all of these different companies looking to make their platforms and looking to go out here and hoping to go out here and make the same money that Netflix did as they withdrew all of their content off the Netflix platform. They hoped that by making their content exclusive to Netflix, not to Netflix, but to their own platforms like Paramount Plus, Disney Plus, and Peacock, they would be able to reap the same kinds of profits that Netflix made. And as they speculated on trying to make the same kind of profits that Netflix made, what the studios did was go out here and spend money like crazy. What we had was a lot of speculation, very similar to what happened in the early days of the dot coms in the late 90s. Now, in the late 90s, during the time of the dot coms, we had a whole lot of people basically investing in internet websites that basically had no real business model, but people were speculating that these websites were going to be the next big thing. And as they were going out here investing money into these platforms, they were believing that they were going to be able to reap huge profits from the dot-com explosion. Unfortunately, after the 9/11 tragedy, what happened was we started to see that the dot-com bubble wasn't as big as we thought, and many of these companies really did not have any sort of tangible or viable business plan or any sort of tangible or viable business model. And what happened was many of these dot coms basically went under. And the same thing happened with streaming. What happened with streaming was we had a lot of the Hollywood studios out here speculating on the streaming services basically becoming as big as television. And as they went out here speculating on how the streaming service would become as big as television or even big as movies, we had studio executives like Bob Iger and David Zaslav and many others going out here and throwing huge amounts of money and absurd amounts of money at these streaming services in order to create content. Now, Netflix itself was also doing the same thing. They gave $100 million, I believe, to the Duchess of Ratchetness, Meghan Markle, and Prince Harry for content. And they also gave the Obamas a very lucrative deal in order to make content. And the studios were basically looking to spend lots of money spinning off very popular cinematic franchises like the Marvel Cinematic Universe over at Disney Plus, and try to spin off many Star Wars characters in shows like The Mandalorian. They were looking to go here and spend insane amounts of money on these new shows, hoping they would go out here and reach huge dollars on the Disney Plus platform. Now, Disney thought that they would be able to build their audience during the pandemic since people were locked down. And this is the thing that they thought they would be able to do. They thought they would be able to recoup all of their costs by having this captive audience, that this captive audience would continue watching any of the TV shows that they greenlit. But what happened was because the content was of such poor quality, not that many people tuned in long term. Yes, short term, you got people watching shows like WandaVision in the beginning. Unfortunately, a lot of the people who watched WandaVision in the beginning didn't really stick around as the content grew on Disney Plus. And what further compounded the problems over at Disney Plus is that they basically put all of their eggs in the MCU and Star Wars baskets. And that's not how you run a streaming service, which is basically a, a version of a syndicated network. When you're running a network, you need to have a diverse array of content, and you need to have content that appeals to multiple audiences. However, Disney and many of the streaming services always wanted to play it safe. And because they wanted to play it safe, they went out here looking to try to appeal to fandoms in order to try to get a guaranteed audience that was captive. But what they didn't understand is that you really don't want to go for an audience that's connected to fandom, because that audience basically is caught up in the nostalgia of your product and have expectations as related to that product that you wouldn't have for a new product. So they were out here going for older audiences, and those older audiences had a median older age of about 40 to 45 at the time, and it's now about 50. And as they were going for these audiences, they thought they would be able to get this audience to grow, but this audience had already peaked and was already in a state of decline as related to especially Star Wars. And for the MCU, the audience basically had already seen what they wanted to see after Endgame. After Phase 4, they were basically done with the MCU, but we had Bob Iger, who made a heavy, overdone investment into many of these kinds of shows. And again, the investment that he made was extremely excessive. I mean, I had read that he had basically was spending $20 million an episode on The Mandalorian. And when you do the math on 20 million plus about 8 or 13, there's no way that this show could ever be profitable, because this show cost as much as a blockbuster movie when you consider the entire production cost. I mean, the entire production cost for those episodes of The Mandalorian basically cost almost as much as a Star Wars movie. And if you've done this, when you do the math, it just doesn't add up. Even if you got 100 million subs, there would be no way for this show to be profitable. And that was the big problem that led to the complete popping of the streaming bubble. A lot of these studios were basically investing heavy amounts of money into content based on old franchises. And as they went out here and invested so much money into old franchises, they were not really taking a critical assessment of the cost of how they were going to go out here and reap profits. No, they thought that they were going to be able to get all of these subscribers from Netflix to go watch their content. But what they didn't understand about the Netflix business model is that the Netflix business model was really based on having fresh content, because the main thing that drove a lot of Netflix was fresh content. Moreover, what drove it was diverse content because, yes, while Netflix did have superhero shows like Daredevil, Luke Cage, The Punisher, and Jessica Jones and Iron Fist, it also had sitcoms like Fuller House, and it also had a whole bunch of new and original movies. And it was that diversity of content that was the thing that drove Netflix as related to a lot of their original content. What drove their original content was the fact that they had lots of different types of content for everyone. And they also had a lot of the movies that people missed at the theater. So there was a lot of different things for people to watch. Unfortunately, when Disney Plus and Paramount Plus were launched and Peacock was launched, they basically were platforms that were in a box, and they were in a box that basically just limited you to either Disney content, Paramount content, or Comcast content. And as you were limited to the content, you basically were stuck only being able to watch a few things and not be able to watch everything. And this basically, what this did was it wound up fragmenting the streaming audience. And as the streaming audience got fragmented, this is where people stopped seeing the value of streaming because $8 a month at Netflix turns into, I believe, 8 times 4 or 5. It turns into about $40 and 40 to $60 a month, depending on what you watched, was no different than basic cable. And you were basically not only for the cable internet in your home, which was about $75 to $80 a month, depending on what service you had, but you had to pay another $60 to $80 for all these streaming services. So people wound up being forced to pay over $120 a month, putting them back in the same place they were back when they were out here getting cable. When people were getting cable after the Telecom Act of 1996 consolidated media, and before the Great Recession, people were paying over $120 a month for cable. And this was not even with the premium channels. This was just with the basic channels. So a lot of people looked at this whole situation and basically saw themselves in the same box they were in when they were out here with basic cable. And that's where a lot of people started going from cutting the cord like they did in 2009 after the Great Recession. A lot of people cut their cords to the internet after TV went digital, and they wanted to go to the internet because they could be able to see content and see unique content and leave that much for it. But what happened was with the whole streaming services, instead of us being able to get content that was affordable, it got expensive. And even worse, the content that was supposed to be exclusive and was offered was not really of high quality. Many of the studios, as they were looking to make their own content, going out here and not hiring experienced writers to go out here and craft stories and cater to the fandoms. No, what they did was go out here and hire a lot of activists, and they hired all of these activists in order to push agendas featuring these franchise characters. And as they wound up going out here and hiring all of these different these inexperienced writers to work on these franchises, what this did was go out here and alienate a lot of the viewers who were out here and watching these shows that were a part of fandoms like the MCU, like Star Wars and Star Trek. And as they were alienating their fandoms, this is what led to many people winding up canceling their subscriptions and wound up with them not being interested in going out here and supporting streaming. And as those people got tired of supporting streaming, what they did was not really go out here and watch the way the studios expected them to, because what the studios expected them to do was they expected them to watch TV or streaming the same way they watch television. Moreover, they expected them to continue to spend money the way they did with Netflix, because with Netflix, people would keep their subscriptions and not even watch anything. I mean, I was guilty of this myself. I would keep a Netflix subscription and would not watch it for maybe 2 or 3 months until something came along. But what happened during the pandemic was a lot of people were so overwhelmed by the cost of all of these different services and not really satisfied with the content that they began to just go out here and cancel their subscriptions, especially when they saw that shows were not up to standard. Like when they saw many of these shows after Falcon and Winter Soldier with the MCU weren't very good, and they saw that shows like She-Hulk Attorney at Law were absolutely terrible. That's when they starting to get really selective about these streaming services and started cutting the service and only watching it for a special show that would come on the platform, but and then just go on and then wait for the next special show. But the big problem with streaming is that they just don't have any special content. No, there's nothing really special about these platforms that allows you to say that they have a fingerprint as related to their content. And because there's nothing special on these platforms, people are now in a space where they're just canceling their subscriptions. And that is the thing that led to the streaming bubble completely popping for Hollywood and many Hollywood executives scrambling to try to find a way out of the fiscal hole that they wound up putting themselves into. A lot of these studio executives, because many of these guys really didn't understand the business model for television, again, were gambling on streaming basically becoming the next big thing, similar to the .com investors, and not really understanding how the business works. Now, the business of streaming, as I see it, is very similar to syndication. And with syndication, it's a secondary a revenue stream where you're looking to go out here and make your money by going out here and buying content. And as you buy content, you're looking to go out here and buy content that's appealing to audiences and also appealing to advertisers who will go out here and advertise in the commercial spaces of that content. That's how syndicators usually made their money on older content. And it's also how they made their money on first run content. And when it came to first run content that syndicators usually made, they always made sure that that first run content was always something that they could go out here and get real cheap and also get something that would appeal to a larger audience of people like those in fandoms. Now, I remember back in the 80s and the 90s when they started Star Trek The Next Generation. I remember them appealing to all of the Trekkies out there with Star Trek The Next Generation. And as they looked to sell the show in syndication, they wanted to remind everybody of the original Star Trek show. And while the first season was really rickety, the second season really was solid. And as word of mouth spread about the second season, this is what led to the show becoming successful. And one of the reasons why the show was successful was because one, the budget for Star Trek The Next Generation was really low, and two, you didn't have big name actors. You had to pay lots of money. I mean, at the time, guys like Patrick Stewart, Jonathan Frakes, Michael Dorn, Brent Spiner, Marina Sirtis, and I believe her name is Beverly something. All of these actors, again, these were not actors who were paying $1 million a year to. These were actors who were just working at, at a decent rate. And the show's budget basically was possibly at that time in 1987, about $500,000 an episode maximum, probably $250,000 overall. They weren't spending a boatload of money on this show, and that's what made the show very profitable to advertisers and very profitable to independent networks, which brought the show to put in their time slots on Saturday nights or Sunday nights where they had their big audience. So they understood, okay, if we're going to make these kind of first run content for a platform, it's got to be made real cheap, and it's got to be made in a way that goes out here and allows us to pull a profit, the product to pull a profit, the studio to pull a profit. That's the kind of thinking that people had back in the days of syndication that many of the streamers did not have. Now, the streamers basically went crazy with their budgets, and because they went crazy with their budgets, they really didn't do the math that would allow them to go out here and pull a profit. No, what they did were like in the case of The Mandalorian spending $20 million an episode. That was something that would never be done as related to guys like Rob Topper and Sam Raimi back in the 90s when they were doing the Hercules, the Legendary Journeys show and Xena Warrior Princess. Again, that show, it became a huge hit because, again, it followed the business model of making sure that the budget was low, one, two, making sure that they were hiring no-name actors so that the character could stand out and the action on the show could stand out, and three, they didn't spend heavy money on computer generated effects. No, they oftentimes use practical effects on shows in order to make sure that they could make an action packed show at a reasonable budget and be able to appeal to all of those people in the audience and be able to also get those ad dollars and ad revenue to come in to make their show appealing to others. Now, this was done with many syndicated shows on on syndication. I mean, I remember not only Hercules: The Legendary Journeys doing this, I also remember Babylon 5 doing it. I remember many shows, again, like Sinbad and many others, because syndication was a huge market in the 90s. And they had practically a lot of action shows from about 1994 to 1999. And all of these shows all followed the business model of making sure that they kept their shows under a certain amount of budget. And you also, yeah, I also remember Farscape myself, Mind and Body. Again, great show, made for extremely low budgets. I mean, these fandoms with just being low budget shows and syndication. And this was the model that the streaming services should have followed. Unfortunately, the streaming services didn't follow that model because they were believing that they could go out here and make millions of dollars on subscriptions, not understanding that in order to go out here and make these shows a hit, as related to fandom, you have to start out with a small budget. You have to start out with rookie actors or actors who are looking for any sort of break. I mean, when I look at how they made Hercules: Legendary Journeys, Lucy Lawless was she came on the show basically in a big role and then graduated all the way up to Xena Warrior Princess. She did, and then she got her own show due to the popularity of the character. Again, everything came organic from the show and out of the budgets. So these were not big multi-million dollar shows. These were shows that if you did the entire budget for the show, possibly came up to maybe $5-10 million. Same thing for Star Trek Next Generation. Same thing for Babylon 5. Same thing for Farscape, Andromeda. I mean, there were just so many of these shows. Nightman. I mean, these shows made big money for Hollywood because they didn't cost a lot of money. And this is what flew over the heads of Hollywood executives who just opened up and wrote blank checks for these kind of shows. I mean, they basically just wrote blank checks for these shows and spent absurd amounts of money. And then they spent even more money on things like CGI. Again, something when you think about those 90s syndicated shows, they never spent that kind of money. I mean, they never spent that kind of money on what they spent on most of the MCU shows or on Hercules, Star Trek, Xena, Farscape, Andromeda, or even shows like VIP. They never spent that kind of money. I mean, they just put those shows on, let them run, and they were able to go out here and get enough revenue for the show to make its money back. But that wasn't, but because we didn't have really seasoned TV executives working on the streaming services, they didn't know how to create first run content and make first run content that would be able to go out here and make money for them. No, we didn't, because you have guys like Bob Iger, who basically was a guy, he was used to going out here and using gimmicks and buying up content. He wasn't in the process of understanding how to sell content. And David Zaslav was a guy who used to reality programming like Discovery, he really didn't have that vision for creating the kind of shows that would make a streaming service profitable. I mean, in order to make a streaming service profitable, you would need somebody who would understand how to produce shows on a small budget, similar to a Haim Saban. I mean, Haim Saban was a master of being able to make shows at a small budget. I mean, this is how he turned Mighty Morphin Power Rangers into a phenomenon. He turned it into a phenomenon because he just knew how to go out here and make shows on small budgets. Now, he didn't usually use union performers in his shows, but he knew how to go out here and make a concept that was able to go out here and be able to go out here and be able to come and go out here and make this concept go well. You have to understand to go out here and make a content at a small budget. This is where you're going to go out here and make the money, because even if you do just do one season, you're going to be able to pull profits because the show doesn't cost that much and you're not really paying a lot of money per episode. And this is where the people who out here in streaming didn't understand how the business worked. Again, you have to have an understanding of how television and movies work in order to make a successful streaming business. And I dare to say you have to know how syndication works in order to know how to make streaming work, because streaming, again, is very similar to syndication in that your first run content be made with low budgets. It has to be made on the cheap, and you really have to focus on making content with fresh new performers, not try to go out here and try to appeal to older audiences with old content, because the money is made with the younger audiences. They are the people who connect with the first run content. I mean, yes, you may have a concept like Star Trek: The Next Generation that came from the 1960s, Star Trek, but the Next Generation really started to grow because it became its own show. And when it became its own show, that's when Star Trek: The Next Generation really started to build up its fan base and became a huge hit for people. I mean, this is what the studio executives did not understand about streaming. They were looking to try to make streaming like mainstream television, but streaming is not going to be mainstream television. No, streaming is a platform where people are going to be watching on demand. And as they watch what they want when they want, you've got to have fresh content with fresh ideas. And that's where streaming basically wound up its bubble completely popping, because a lot of the content creators were not really going out here and creating that fresh content that people were looking for. And as they were competing with each other, what happened was they were encroaching on their television numbers. And this is why TV numbers dropped over 50%, because what people were doing was saying, hey, I'll catch this show on one of these streaming platforms. There's no urgency for me to go run to watch television anymore, because the show is going to be on a streaming platform. So I don't have to rush and run and wait to watch this at 8 o'clock on Thursday night anymore. No, I can go wait to see if it'll pop up on streaming. I mean, I did that with, I believe it was Master Chef. They started running Master Chef shows on Tubi, and I missed an episode of Master Chef, and 2 weeks later it was on Tubi. So I watched it on Tubi and went it there instead. So that's what people were doing with a lot of streaming. And again, the studio executives, they thought they would be able to have a captive audience with streaming. They really didn't understand how the business worked. And again, this is because we didn't have a seasoned television executive going out here laying the ground for streaming. People were speculating. They were spending all kinds of money, and they spent all kinds of money on content that really wasn't going to sell long term. I mean, the whole concept of syndication, that's what it used to be, was you wanted to make content that would sell all overall for years. I mean, you wanted to make content that people would watch 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, that's what syndication was all about. That's what shows like Star Trek: The Next Generation, Star Trek: Deep Space Nine. That's what they were all about, making a show that would last 20, 30, 40 years. And people are still watching those shows 20, 30, 40 years later. And that's why they're having problems with streaming. Again, you're focusing on things like the MCU, you're focusing on Star Wars, and not focusing on the right kind of content. And because they're not focusing on the right kind of content, this is why the streaming bubble popped. I mean, the streaming bubble was just one that was filled with a lot of speculators, and these speculators just kept pumping things up. They kept thinking, oh, this is going to be the next big thing, but again, never thinking critically about what they were investing in. And many of the executives were never really thinking critically about what they were greenlighting or the type of audience they were looking to appeal to. I mean, they weren't really thinking about the kind of audience they were appealing to. They just thought, oh, these people from fandoms will come and watch these shows, not really thinking that you really need to think about building a larger base for your audience. This was the mistake that Netflix actually made with their Fuller House show, which was a reboot of Full House. I remember reading about Fuller House, and they talked about how the show, yes, it did well as related to older viewers, but it did not really do well with younger viewers. And this is why the show was canceled after 4 seasons. And the same thing happened with iCarly. iCarly did well for Paramount Plus as related to older viewers, but it didn't bring in any young viewers. So what's happened is that they're spending all kinds of money on these kinds of shows. And again, these shows are costing twice as much as they did in the 90s in syndication, all because nobody's really thinking about how much they're spending because they think they're going to be able to rip this back. But you have to really think about the kind of money you're spending when you're out here developing any sort of media platform. You have to really think about the money you're spending on first run content. First run content that's going to drive your viewers. I mean, yes, people will come to watch older movies. I mean, it's with Tubi all the time, but it's the first run content that's going to bring in the new viewers. And if you don't really focus on developing strong first run content, then you're not going to be able to keep bringing in new viewers. And that was another tactical error that Hollywood executives made with their streaming services. They made the tactical error of not thinking about bringing in new content. They really just weren't focusing on it because they thought, oh, we'll get these older viewers like Peacock thought they would do with Bel Air and the soap opera Days of Our Lives and some of the wrestling content. But they weren't thinking about, hey, let's take some money and put it in some small budget stuff and see if this small budget stuff will go out here and draw us some new audience. Because when you are out here and you're in entertainment, you really want to focus on making fresh content. And again, you also want to give right. Now, I find this interesting that as they were out here making their streaming services, again, I didn't see much focus on comedies. I did not see much focus on any sort of serialized drama. I didn't even see much focus on animated series outside of X-Men 97. I mean, I would think if you're doing a streaming service, you would want to have as much unique content as possible on that service. And you would want to go out here and say, okay, we're going to launch some new characters, some new stories, and we're going to see where this goes. We'll just put in a 13 episode order for some animated series. We'll put in a 13 episode order for a sitcom, and we'll run them one episode a week and see how it goes and do stuff that, again, is small budget, like a small budget action show that uses practical special effects, stuff that only costs maybe today, maybe $1 million an episode or maybe $500,000 an episode, something that would not be too expensive. Unfortunately, that's not the way many of today's executives thought, because they thought that the superhero movie bubble was going to continue going on and they'd have endless money coming in and billion-dollar years coming in. They thought that they would have this money plus the streaming money, but that didn't really happen. And it didn't happen because what happened is that audience basically had grown tired of seeing the same kind of content. I mean, you had been bombarded with MCU at the theater, you had been bombarded with MCU on streaming, you've been bombarded with all sorts of the same content over and over again, and it became overwhelming for the audience, which really wants to see something different. And that's where the first run content could have been an advantage. But the studios really, because they don't have visionaries working for them, don't know how to go out here and look for first run content that can be made for an extremely small budget. Again, the reason why a lot of these franchises we see today are big, like Buffy's, the Xena fan bases, the Star Trek fan bases, Hercules and Xena, all those fan bases in Babylon 5 and Andromeda, and all of these fan bases came about is because these shows were small budget, and these small budget shows gained followings over the years, and they gained followings because they weren't that expensive to produce. You could watch them on a Saturday afternoon, and if these shows again they were perfect for streaming. But I'm sitting there wondering why aren't anybody making these kind of shows? But the whole thing is they're so focused in the tunnel vision they can't see where they need to go in order to make streaming profitable. Now, Disney has spent billions of dollars and hopes to make streaming profitable in the long term, but with the business model they have, it's not going to ever be profitable. Same thing with Paramount Plus, same thing with Peacock, same thing with all of these streaming services. They have the absolute wrong business model because they are hoping that the audience will just stay for one for all of their content, which is cool, and hoping that they can take older franchises and make them into something popular. Now, the real business model is you want to go out here and focus on the smaller budgeted content. You want to focus on the smaller budgeted content because that's where the money is, and you want to focus on the smaller budgeted content because the smaller budgeted content, this is where the audience is. The small budget action shows, the small budget adventure shows, the small budget comedies, the teen comedies. I always found it mind boggling for me that Disney, which made its money in the 2000s on teen comedies, did not have a teen comedy exclusive to their streaming. That was a head scratcher for me that they didn't have a teen comedy on their platform. I mean, you made all your money on That's So Raven, Sweet Life of Zach and Cody, and many other shows like I believe Hannah Montana and Sweet and Lizzie McGuire, but you don't launch a new teen sitcom. These were money that would have gotten you all of the younger viewers and would have gotten subs before to watch these shows, but they didn't really do a good job of trying to make that kind of content because they thought that all they were going to do is superheroes all the time. And the same thing I think about again as related to the again action shows. Why did you just do one of those other types of action shows? I mean, it's like Hollywood has tunnel vision on superheroes and all that kind and older superhero and older franchises, but it's not really focused on making the kind of content that would draw people in. I mean, I look at them and there's no real content on them. And again, this is why they're struggling right now. The reason why many of the streaming platforms are struggling is there's not enough content, fresh content there to get people excited about it. I mean, just a couple of months ago, I got a Paramount Plus subscription for free to watch Transformers Rise of the Beast. As I was watching Rise of the Beast, and I was able to watch Ninja Turtles. I watched them for free. I looked all across their website, and yes, they did have all of the Star Trek on there, but they just didn't have enough content to draw me in. I mean, I saw a couple of movies here that I watched Clueless on there as I had my free subscription, but I just didn't see enough content to make me want to stay there regularly. Same things for Disney Plus. When I had Disney Plus for a month for $1.99, didn't really see much there. Same thing for HBO Max. There just isn't enough content because it's all fragmented. And even worse, there's no fresh first run content that makes me want to watch. I mean, I think about Max and their ridiculous And Just Like That, which is a Sex and the City spinoff that really doesn't appeal to anyone over the age of about 60. I mean, you're making a show about a show that came about in the 2000s, and most of the people who watched it back then were 30, and they're about 50 to 60 right now. So, where's the audience for younger viewers? That's the critical question I got to ask Max about it. Just Like That, you're not really appealing to that younger audience and giving them content that will bring them in. I mean, a lot of this content you're bringing to me is very old for older viewers, and the median age is about 40 or 50. What people want is some fresh, cheap content, and this is why streaming is struggling right now. This and the fact that many of the people they're hiring are not very creative. I mean, when you look at streaming, they'll create a concept, but what they will do is hire inexperienced writers who have no knowledge of the material, no passion for the material, and they go out here and create uninspired scripts. And this is a 180 from what we saw with Netflix's Daredevil, Cage, and their Marvel shows. I mean, when you look at Daredevil seasons 1 through 3, they're just absolutely fantastic. It's just like the comic. When you look at Luke Cage, it was basically like it took the comic to the next level. And that's because the creators there had so much passion for the material. And as they had passion for the material, I'll say one thing: Netflix did follow the syndication model, then making shows on the cheap, using no-name actors, and just making the show's stories stand out. I mean, that was one of the things that made the Netflix shows so popular and made Luke Cage one of the most popular shows, where it basically crashed Netflix's was again following the same model as syndication, basically going out here making a show, adapting it from the source material, making it on the cheap, using exterior locations in places like Harlem to give it a sense of authenticity, but also keeping in mind that the budget was a certain level, not going overboard and spending a boatload of money it didn't need to spend. That's one of the things I really admired about the original Netflix Marvel series was they again followed the business model of syndication. But the problem is that Hollywood came in and wanted to make the money that Netflix did. They started going out here and started spending absurd amounts of money. But as they spent absurd amounts of money, they diluted the content as they separated from Netflix. And as they wound up separating from Netflix, the content on all of these platforms became really weak. And again, instead of people getting a full flavored piece of pie, what they got was a watered down piece, and they have to go to different places in order to get the full thing. So that's what really made streaming not a place people wanted to be, because you had all these corporate types. What they wanted to do was go out here and think they could make the money that Netflix made, not understanding how Netflix made its money and not also understanding how money is made in television. What I see in entertainment right now is that you've got a lot of inexperienced people who don't really understand how money is made in television and film. And because they don't understand how money is made in television and film, what they're doing is going out here and just throwing away billions of dollars. And this is why they can't get streaming to be profitable, because you're just one, spending way too much money, two, you're hiring actors who are just too expensive, three, you're hiring inexperienced writers and directors, and four, you just don't have a plan to target an audience as related to the content that you produce. That's the big problem that's leading to what people call the SJW or woke content. But what they call SJW or woke content that is damaging streaming is due to incompetent leadership that doesn't understand how the business works. When you understand how the business works, you understand that, hey, I cannot go out here and spend $20 million on a single episode of a series. No, $20 million basically is like that's like the budget for 2 years of a sci-fi series, maybe even 3 seasons of a series, and that's what you're supposed to spend $20 million on, so that the show can get you $40 or $50 million in profit. But if you spend $20 million an episode and you multiply that by 8 to 13 episodes, you're looking at spending again 200 to $300 million, and there's no way you can pull a profit on that because you have to go out here and make 3 times the profit on the production budget and advertising. So, in order for a show like The Mandalorian or any of these Star Wars or MCU shows to be profitable, they have to pull in billions of dollars, and that's not possible for a series like this. No, usually when they did syndicated shows like this, again, they usually spent maybe $5-10 million on the entire season. And that's a very, again, high estimate because the show costs lower than that. And they look to make their money on the advertising, and that usually covered the one part of the cost. The other part was covered by all of the networks buying the show. So by the time the show aired in syndication, they basically had made almost all their money back. And if the ratings were good, they would get an opportunity to get bought by those other channels in independent platforms. Unfortunately, we don't have many independent channels anymore because of all of the media conglomeration due to the Telecom Act of 1996. And with streaming, everything is consolidated. So there's no way for these studios to recoup the costs on much of their content. And they're not really thinking critically about how much they're spending and how you would need to make a certain amount of money on the profit in order to make a profit. I mean, as somebody, again, who's been studying entertainment for 25 years, I know where they went wrong with streaming. And again, I understand that they're just spending way too much money. Again, these shows should not be costing this much money. And when it comes to these shows, there needs to be more variety. There needs to be some animated series. There needs to be some sitcoms. There needs to be shows that don't really cost too much money so that people have an incentive to sub. But right now, as it stands, people don't have an incentive to sub because most of the content on streaming basically caters to fandoms and doesn't cater to the average everyday working man and woman, and more importantly, doesn't appeal to the tweens and teens where the real money is. I mean, the real money is in the younger people, the tweens, the teens who are watching on their cell phones on the train, the kids watching on their cell phones at lunch, the kids watching on their cell phones or their iPads on breaks on college campuses. This is where the money is, but we don't see executives looking to go for that money. That's the money I would be going for in full force. I would be out here if I was running a streaming service, making a lot of content for children and young adults, making family shows, making sitcoms, making small budget action shows, stuff that I know that kids will go out here and want to watch on a sub. This and sub for. I mean, this is what's going to be able to bring you the money in the bank because if the show was only costing you maybe $500,000 to $1 million an episode, and you're making 8 episodes or 10 episodes, then that show is not going to cost you a lot. I mean, if it's $500,000, 500,000 times 8 is $4 million, and you can easily make $4 million on subs for that show, and in about 3 to 6 months. And if it's $1 million an episode, you're gonna and you got 8 to 10 episodes, then you could possibly make $10 million and make $30 million in a year or so. I mean, you could make your money back on that kind of programming if you go out here and have a right approach to business. But these guys, again, because they just think the money was going to be endless, don't understand how they basically spent themselves into a hole similar to the hole that the .com types spent themselves in the early 2000s, where they thought it was going to be endless money. They would put up a .com, and there would be people out here looking to spend money at the .com. That's what they thought with the .coms, and that led to the bubble bursting. And the same thing happened with streaming. The entire bubble wound up bursting. But there is one ray of hope for streaming, and that is the Tubi platform. Now, the Tubi platform, which was owned by Fox, many people didn't think it knew what it was doing. But when I look at their business model, it is doing things the right way. Tubi basically is seen as a syndicated platform where people can go and watch a lot of older movies that are uncut. I mean, I go there all the time watching movies that are uncut from the 80s for free. And that's the other thing that's good about Tubi is that it's free. And the other thing that's good about them is that they have a lot of solid content base for people of all ages. There's no tunnel vision as related to content. There's a lot of family content on there, a lot of old animated series, a lot of kid shows, and a lot of different varieties of content. And even though you got to sit through a commercial here or there, it's not that bad with Tubi. You get to see a lot of great content, but there's also the original content on there. They have first run stuff. And yeah, people make fun of Tubi movies, and I have talked about Tubi movies, basically reminding me a lot of the old 80s movies of the week. But those movies are following a successful business model because while those movies are just pure cheese, they do get you to be able to want to watch them because of the cheese factor. And the whole thing is that these films are not made with huge budgets. They are made for the right size budget. I mean, when you're thinking about making content for streaming, you really don't want to be going out here and spending $50 million on a movie. No, you're probably going to spend maybe $1 million at best on a movie that's going to be made exclusively for streaming. And yeah, some of the special effects are kind of cheesy, but people know this going in. They say, yeah, we know a Tubi original is cheesy. And a Tubi original is cheesy because it follows the business model that syndicators followed for many years. Syndicators understood, yeah, we don't have that big of a budget for our production. And even though we don't have that big of a budget, we still make things work. And we're going to make it work. We're going to make it have fun with it. And it will hopefully we'll go out here and be able to make some money. So Tubi has a more successful business model than the mainstream streaming platforms. And Fox didn't think it was going to do well, but Tubi is doing well because you can go there. I go there every Saturday to check out a movie, and I go there and I find a lot of great content on there. Just a very just well done website. And again, you can sit there and watch whatever you want, and you don't have to worry about anybody talking about SJW, identity politics, or anything like that. Their movies are just basic movies. I mean, a lot of their black movies are pure cheese, and they they give you good options. So when I look at Tubi, that's the way streaming services are supposed to be run. Because if you're going out here and making content, content is king, and Tubi does give you a variety of content. That is another advantage that it gives you. I mean, they basically are buying movies the same way syndicators buy movies. They go out here and they're buying the movies that they think will get them a big audience. And yes, movies come and go over there, but those same movies come and go on Amazon, come on Netflix, come on Max, come on the what is it, Peacock, but you have to pay for them over there. But if you wait long enough, you can go watch them on Tubi for free. And Tubi again takes the syndicated model and brings it over to streaming. So that's where I see streaming going like Tubi is doing. Tubi is like, hey, we're going to run this like a syndicator. We'll buy the content that we want. People will come and go and see it, and we'll get ad dollars from them watching. And as they watch the movies, and we get and they put and you can put on your ads on Tubi, we'll go out here and make our money on the ads and make the money the same way the syndicators do. And they do this, and it has their right older movies, but they also do it with first run content, and it gives you that variety that you want when you're out here watching content. So I look at Tubi as the way um, streaming is supposed to go, because to me, streaming is just like syndication, but it's a contrary version of syndication, because syndication basically again was supposed to supplement television and movies, and it was supposed to be a place where you would be able to sell content that's already been produced and first run content that would not be viable on a mainstream platform. So I look at streaming as a place where they can go out here and make bunch of money. And Tubi shows us that it is possible to go out here and make money. And that's where it needs to be. But the sad part is we have Disney Plus and Paramount Plus and all these other platforms. I don't see them lasting long because you're trying to make people pay for content that they can already get for free on Tubi. I mean, a lot of the movies that they put on Paramount Plus and Amazon Prime and all these other platforms like Disney Plus, they oftentimes wind up running on Tubi. So I look at the streaming bubble and I see it popping even further because there's no way that these studios can keep these servers going because what's going to drive them isn't the old content. And the problem over at these studios is that they don't have enough new content in order to keep their platforms going. There's not enough money to keep those platforms going because they're very risk averse at this point, in the aftermath of the writer's strike, in the aftermath of the writer's strike, and them having to pay more money. Yes, they're canceling a lot of content, but they're not taking risks as related to their content. So since they're not taking risks as related to content, they don't have the creativity to make the streaming services grow because streaming services cannot be just about superhero shows or catering to fandoms. It's got to be creating new fandoms and creating new fandoms with new types of shows. And again, the only way you're going to do that is by making small budget content, and that's the mistake that they made. Yeah, with 78 Part 2, yeah, Fox turned down a lot of offers to sell Tubi, but they understood the value of Tubi because Tubi is a revenue maker for them. I mean, Tubi basically, they're drawing in a whole bunch of money from commercials, just airing old movies for free, and all the ad revenue that they're drawing in is basically going to pay for the service because yes, they pay a fee for some of these movies. Some of these movies are not owned by Fox, but they're going to go out here and make their money on all of that content with just the ad money. And the original Tubi movies, yes, some of them are going to make people laugh because of the cheesy production values, but that money is those movies at least are going to get eyeballs because I see people always talking about them, talking about how cheesy they are. But that's the draw for those movies because it's just like the old TV movies of the 80s and the 90s, the Tuesday night movie or the Sunday night movie. These movies were again were made for nothing, and they were made for absolutely nothing in order for the studio to pull a profit of the product, pull a profit on them. So this is where I see streaming going. But when I look at these other platforms, they're just spending way too much money. So I look at them and these streaming services, they're wanting to raise prices. I look like Disney Plus, they want to raise prices to $15 a month. Netflix wants to raise prices to $15 a month. Others want to raise their price. It's not going to really help them pull profits. No, what pulls a profit for a website is content. And when I look at these sites, there's not enough fresh new content to draw people in. I mean, yes, there are people who are nostalgic for shows like Batman the animated series, Static Shock, and shows like X-Men the animated series, Spider-Man the animated series, and many of the older shows. But that's not enough money for somebody to pay $50 a month to get those on DVD for a lower price. I mean, for eBay DVDs of these shows for maybe $5, $6. So the streaming bubble is one that really it's popped and it's again it's deflating as we speak because we have executives who don't understand how the business works. And the business as related to the internet is you have to continue producing fresh content and you have to make fresh original content on your platform. I mean, it's no different than a YouTuber like myself. That's why I come out with daily content every day because I know that the audience is going to get tired of seeing the same stuff over and over again. And that's why I mix it up as related to content. I do things like, again, the historical men and women in crisis series. I do the man crisis videos. I do comic reviews. I do all sorts of different topics. I want to, again, give people that variety because nobody's going to want to sit there and watch the same thing every day. So that's what streaming is the big problem. They just don't give you that variety like Tubi is giving you. You really want that variety. You want to go out here and like Mind and Body said, really want to adapt that work and stay true to the source material and keep that built-in audience, and also go out here and hire some new creators. That's another thing that I believe many of the streamers needed to do, and many of them basically they don't do this at all. I mean, Netflix used to option deals for a lot of comic books, which was not really a smart thing to do. They were optioning to a lot of a lot of these newer comic concepts, but they weren't buying anything or putting a budget on things. And you really have to go out here and go out here and buy things because again, an option isn't a sale. I may do a whole video on how an option isn't a sale. An option just gives people an opportunity to be able to buy the right in the future. And one of those options at a future date, if you can get the money for them, what happens in an option in a lot of cases is that constantly get shopped around and you get shopped around to all the readers at the studio. There's no way for you to get a sale. So you really don't want an option. That's something I wanted to talk about in another comment for a while in the future. But I look at this whole thing as really again streaming. It was a big bubble. I mean, it was people thought it was going to be the next big thing, but sadly, we didn't have any seasoned people as related to television to explain to these executives how television works and explain to them that when it comes to streaming, it is just syndication all over again. Again, with television and movies, they are considered to be different markets. Movies are considered to be the primary market in entertainment. TV is considered to be a secondary market. Syndication is a tertiary market or third market, and streaming has always been considered to be a quandary or a fourth market. And the fourth, and with each market, the revenue drops lower from each one. I mean, movies are the highest revenue. TV is the second highest revenue. Syndication is the third highest revenue. That in cable, and streaming is the fourth lower level of revenue. So there was no way you're going to make billions of dollars on streaming because streaming was a quandary market, and it was a place where content goes where it can't go to the other three markets. If the content can't go to the other three markets, which are more profitable because they make higher money because of ad dollars, then there's no way you can go out here and be able to make money like you did for the movies. That was the other mistake that executives made. Yes, people are paying for subs, but the whole thing is that the revenue that you're going to make is very small in comparison to the revenue you would make from ad dollars and the money you would make from running something first run on a mainstream media platform. So a lot of the executives there were not really understanding the business as related to streaming, and that's why the streaming bubble popped. They just threw too much money at streaming, hoping it would become huge, but there was no way for it to become huge because, again, it was a quandary revenue stream. And it just shows me, again, how sadly many Hollywood executives don't really know their own business. And because they don't really understand their business, they just were speculating, hoping this would be big like .coms, but it just turned into another .bomb. And as it turned into .bomb, we see that the streaming bubble is popped for Hollywood, and now Hollywood is scrambling to find a way to make money as many of these studios drown in debt from all the money they borrowed, as like Bob Iger borrowed all that money to buy Fox, and many of these other studios went out here and borrowed a lot of money to make these expensive productions, and all of these guys basically have made a lot of invested a lot of money to take on major losses that may be a major part of imploding the entertainment industry and may lead to some of these studios possibly being on the brink of bankruptcy because they invested too heavily in streaming. And some will sit there and say, oh, the writer's strike was meant to correct this, but the debts, when you greenlight projects, the money is already spent. When you've spent money, you're taking on losses. And even if you write some of these projects off on your taxes, you're still taking huge losses. And that's what happened here as related to streaming. Again, another speculative bubble that has popped and led to the complete entertainment industry being on the brink of being up for a major crash. Now, I'm going to get ready to wrap up tonight's stream. I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I want to thank Jack Diesel, Keating Rourke, Michael Bays, um, Javanya Joseph. Hi, how are you? Otto DeBergiak. I never saw the Continental Mind and Body. Ronald K. Armstrong. Let's see here. Bernard and Dark Titan. Hi, how are you? All of you guys. D Wood 78 Part 2. Just glad to see you all here. Rob IS. Hi, how you doing? Just say hi to everybody. Shout out to S Represent, LaShawn Jefferson. Just wanted to say, how are you guys doing? I'm glad you're checking out my book, Mind and Body. I think you'll like anything that's there. But I'm going to get ready to wrap up tonight's stream. But before I get ready to wrap up tonight's stream, I want everybody to head over to Amazon.com and pick up the 2023 SJS Correct books, John Haynes 1987 and John Haynes Godbreaker, which you can pick up right now in paperback and in Kindle format. You can pick up John Haynes Godbreaker and John Haynes 1987 by going over to Amazon.com and clicking the link in the chat. So that will get you all of my books on the SJS Direct imprint, including the ISIS series, the Steam series, the John Haynes series, and the books of the Spinsterella trilogy and my other novels like Eternal Night and The Thetas. And if you guys could also head over to Lulu.com, you guys can pick up the first full John Haynes comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, which is available right now from the 2022 Kickstarter. This is a great comic, and a lot of people have told me that they enjoyed it. I mean, I've gotten positive praise from Kevin Brevu, the creator of Blue Marvel, and other comic creators who have said that they really enjoyed this comic. So if you guys could head over to Lulu, you get your own paper copy and be able to check out the first full John Haynes comic. And if you want to see me be able to make more live streams and be able to make up my second full SJS Direct comic, you can send a donation to the Cash App or the PayPal, and 100% of that money goes to me. So if you guys would want to continue supporting the channel and supporting the content, that would be greatly appreciated if you guys drop the donation to the Cash App or the PayPal. So I want to thank everybody for coming out to tonight's stream. Really enjoyed spending my time with you, and I'm really grateful that you guys took time to spend with me. And I hope you'll be here for next week's stream. Everybody have a good evening, and everybody have a good night.